piece that comes from the store. It's the story behind it because it makes the item come alive.
From war memorabilia to this time punch clock from 1910, there's nothing predictable inside the Old Town Buda Antique Mall.
We've had an electroshock therapy box from the Victorian era that worked. We've had funeral spires, embalming manual books from like the 20s.
Owner Jeff Brown's love for collecting antiques started with his great-grandfather.
He would tell me stories of being in World War I and World War II, and he actually had artifacts and pictures to show. This is a chocolatier's cabinet from Gillen's from the teens.
Much like the antiques inside the store, this three-story brick building in the heart of Buda has its own story, and it's rich in history. Built in 1915 by successful businessman Will Barber, it was the only three-story building in the area.
When I took it over, you know, it just looked like a storefront, three-story storefront. But if you look harder, parts of the story actually start to come alive. And if you look at the windows, you can actually tell they're raising box office ticket windows.
At one time, the antique mall was a movie theater.
Upstairs, there was a little door. When I first took over the building, very small, I would say about probably 4 feet tall. Old handle on it with the skeleton key lock, and learned that that was a projection room door.
It's an easy thing to miss, but if you take a closer look at the brick on the outside of this building, well, it tells its own story.
There's two little windows up in the front that have little signatures and dates on them on the brick outside. That's teenagers that would come to the movies here back in the 40s, and they would leave their mark on the brick outside, and they're still there.
Eventually, the curtains closed on the movie theater, and in the 1950s, the building was split up into apartments. As people have moved out, Jeff has been able to expand.
And I had the original little L shape here, expanded into this back room, and then opened this side room here in October of last year, and the upstairs I opened in April.
Over the years, many people have dropped in to share their stories with Jeff, including one woman who said her aunt used to live in this building.
Her aunt used to live up on the 3rd floor and had 10 kids, and she was telling me about, if you find any old toys on the property, there was a lot of kids here. We found things like jacks with balls, the little bounce balls. We found some cap guns.
What Jeff also found is enough to give you chills.
I did not believe in spirits or anything in the supernatural realm until I took this place over. The very first week, we had a mirror that was up on top of a vanity, and it had a lot of crystal vases in front of it, and when I came in the next morning, it was moved in on the floor, leaning up against the wall with the crystal vases still intact. Here recently, we've actually had the first interaction with customers by, you know, a hat being knocked off. Nothing violent or anything like that. They just kind of want you to know they're here. We've had pictures fly out into the middle of the room, not at people again, but just kind of, again, wanting you to know they're here and catching you off guard.
All of that activity attracted the attention of God Haunts, a paranormal investigations group.
I was here with them overnight, and I actually saw a chair move probably about over the course of 5 minutes, I would say, move approximately a foot.
On the God Haunts website, there's a whole section dedicated to the Buda Antique Mall, along with the investigators' findings. They claim that their recordings captured different voices, like this one. And here's another recording. Whether you believe in the supernatural or not, there's one thing that is certain. This historic building carries an abundance of memories. And Jeff recognizes its significance for the land of the living and for those who have passed on.
It's kind of funny because every night when I go home now, I'll leave the music on for them and I'll be like, well, y'all have a good evening. I'll see you tomorrow.
How many places do you actually have a piece of property that's an old grain mill that can be revitalized into something that's commercial property? I mean, there's not many places that are like 15 miles from a downtown booming city that can actually support that growth.
We just love this old piece of property. You know, as we uncovered things, we found out about ourselves that I mean, I've always loved design, but I didn't realize Sanger did as much.
To call the revitalization of the Buda Mill and Grain a labor of love would be an understatement. The history behind this treasure on South Main runs deep through the veins of Dodie Ellis and her son Sanger.
My mom inherited this from her dad. Her dad, Cecil Ruby, had bought it in 1963. And then he passed away. My dad oversaw it, and then my mom.
Dodie's mother, Gay Dahlstrom, passed away in 2014. Mrs. Dahlstrom always knew this place was special.
And it was these dilapidated old barns, and she could see that, but she was in love with this piece of history that was Buda. I feel like we're part of Buda's collective memory. And you know, that's one of the reasons we saved the original footprints. We didn't alter any of that. We kept the same buildings in the same places.
Take a look at this old aerial photo of the Buda Mill and Grain. This is before the revitalization. Here's what it looks like today. The footprint is still the same, but the transformation is obvious. A transformation that has been years in the making.
While we were cleaning it up, we had someone stop by and ask for a piece of scrap metal. And I said, well, what do you want that for? He said, well, scrap prices are through the roof right now. So really, someone will buy that stuff. And kind of looked all around, and it was like this light went off in my head, and it was like, you can sell metal. So I took the next month, right, maybe 45 days, and sold like several 100,000 pounds of scrap metal. And it was enough to...
It was the seed money.
It was enough to get us the architects.
They even recycled these old rails from the railroad track that were found while they were trenching for wastewater and electrical. Union Pacific had a contract with the mill dating back to 1911. Many are now used as car stops in the parking lot and show dates from 1916. To give you an idea of just how important Buda Mill and Grain was back in the day, it was the first business in Buda to receive a telephone, even before the doctor's office or the grocery store. Dodie and Sanger knew they wanted to stay true to the original look and feel of the mill and grain. That's where the historic structures on the property come in. This brick building behind me was the second cotton gin in Buda. It was built between 1911 and 1914. Originally, it was hidden by 4 silos, which have since been removed.
And we found out as we were working on it that it was built with Butler brick that they purchased from the Zilker Park brick factory, where they had mules. You know, they're going around pulling the clay out to make the brick.
As you can see here, the Assemblage Contemporary Craftsman Gallery next door shares the brick wall from the cotton gin. For years, these words on the brick were a mystery. Turns out, this used to be called the Buda Gin Company. But when the cotton industry took a dive during the Great Depression, local farmers began converting their places to dairies.
There were migrant workers coming through these areas working at different dairies. So then that's how they decided to do the mill. The grain was to feed these cows.
That's when it became Buda Mill and Company, and eventually Buda Mill and Grain Company. Although it's currently unoccupied, the cotton gin will serve as a future restaurant space. Nearby is what used to be the old feed store. Believe it or not, people still call asking for baby chicks or horse feed. Ellipsis is now housed in part of the building. Wood was salvaged from the floors in the feed store. It can now be seen in the dressing rooms in Ellipsis, and it's also seen in the Buda Bike Company and Stella's. Both the Buda Bike Company and Stella's reside in what was a hay barn. Doty and Sanger kept the original footprint of the building. They also kept the large posts in place. A new window was put in on the south end of the building, looking out at the silos. Nate's is a popular hangout now, but this is what it used to be, an old barn.
Nate's is actually named after Nate Smith because he lives down the street over there on the Rose, because he was the tenant that was leasing this space. They were all hobby shops.
Inside Nate's, the original wooden walls and original truss work remains. The concrete floor also tells a story.
Like when you go into Nate's, you'll see this line of concrete that's a little different color. That's where the augers were, and every building had them.
This is one of those removed augers. Augers were used to move the grain through the buildings, and some were buried in the concrete floors.
The auger system ran underneath all the buildings, and also they had another level up in the peak of the roofs that ran through all the buildings, and then they had like a 2-inch molasses line
That we
every
keep
building.
finding.
And so they mix the grain with molasses to make cattle feed. And so the sign that we actually have outside is where they would mix the molasses with the grain and then bag it.
Speaking of molasses, Doty and Sanger discovered a space beneath the porch of the mill that had originally been storage for molasses. In the early 1990s, Doty's parents moved their office to this building. Hard to believe, but the old mill is now home to Salon 112. Down the way is Sweet Cakes for You. Doty's grandfather, Cecil Ruby, used this space as his office. Inside, you'll find the original wooden floors. Next to the bakery, where the patio is located, there used to be a large scale. You can still see the outline of it. The scale was used to measure a truck's weight. On the back end of the mill, you'll find Willow Gardens Hot Yoga. This is actually a new building. This is the largest barn on the property. The entire steel frame has been saved and its look modernized. The Buda Mill and Grain signage was also added. Doty says it would be a great space for an event center.
We've really been selective on who we put in here because we want it to be something that people want to keep coming back for.
At the end of the day, it's all about staying true to the history of the Buda Mill and Grain and its legacy here in Buda.
You know, my parents grew up in Buda. They lived on ranches along 967, and us getting to work with my mom, so it was the three of us initially until she passed away. And then, like Sanger said, you know, my dad's vision back in the 80s of what it would be, you know, it's just you don't often get to come home and still work with those same people, and it was quite a legacy.
It just gives me a sense of joy to be back on campus. And I have very good memories of all my days here at the school.
It worked for here.
Times may have changed, but the memories are still fresh for Paula Green Michaud and her cousin Larry Ferguson. Both attended what used to be Buda High School. Today, it is Buda Elementary.
I mean, I remember going to school here, and everybody knew you by a first name basis, you know, and you knew every teacher, and if you did something wrong, your parents knew it, and after you got paddled at school, you got paddled at home. And that's kind of the way it was.
Built in 1929, this historic campus replaced the old Buda High School after it was destroyed in a fire.
And when I started the school in 1956. I was 5 years old, and my parents paid for me to start first grade here. They actually paid because my birthday was on the 12th, and in order to qualify as a student here, you had to be born on or before the 1st of September, so my parents paid for me.
The campus served as a high school, junior high, and elementary.
The building in front of us is going to be our elementary school. We had classes grades 1, 2, and 3 in this classroom. It was not closed in on the end. It was open area, and there were swings on the end.
This tree has great significance. And you see how the bark is almost white in through there.
Yeah.
We would bring the erasers out, and the teachers would let us pound the erasers on this to get the chalk dust out of it.
This L-shaped building was the junior high.
That building is the junior high school building.
This whole building
This whole building. The end portion was not there when I was in school. That is a newly built portion. But we went to right there.
So everything ended right here?
The 8th grade, yes.
So this building was not here?
No, no. And you can see it's made of a different material.
Here's a look at the original cafeteria, which later burned down. The main building was the high school.
This is room 311 was our business classes.
And that's now the office?
It's now the office, yes, sir.
And this picture was taken outside the current principal's office. At the heart of campus was the auditorium, which is now the Kunkel Room. It has changed quite a bit from back in the day.
There was a wooden floor. The floor slanted. There were stairs in the very center of the stage. There was a very heavy maroon curtain. Anytime there was any big deal occurred here, if the teachers needed to talk to the entire school for whatever reason, we came to the auditorium.
Some of the conveniences we take for granted today would have been perks back then.
There was never any air conditioning and nobody suffered because we didn't know any better. Back then we had fans.
Teachers were also allowed to take a more hands-on approach when it came to discipline. Larry says his science teacher made sure no one was sleeping in class.
And if he caught you putting your head down and sleeping or not paying attention, he loved to dust you.
And what does dusting mean?
He always had an eraser or two with him, and it would go sailing. And the boy in front of my cousin ducked, and it hit her right in the face. Pow! The building over here that we're looking at to the far right was the old bus barn. To the right, the double door area. When I was in school in '67, from '64 through '67 was our actual high school dressing room area, and that was the dressing room for us to get dressed for football practice. Bob Shelton was our coach, and Bob was a great believer in explosion. There was 99 steps going down this hillside. And we would run the steps 10 times every day. We would hop them like a rabbit 5 times every day. And then we would find somebody our size and be required to carry them up the hill 5 times every day.
The nearby gymnasium was moved to campus from Camp Swift in Bastrop, where it served as an airplane hangar. Every summer, the city had a fireman's ball here.
And they'd have a dance, and it was like a sock hop. But everybody from the community and everybody would support the fire department.
Larry graduated from Buda High in 1967. He says at the time, school activities played a major role in Buda.
On Friday evenings, we'd have the pep rally, and somebody could have robbed the bank because everybody was here for the pep rally to encourage the boys to play hard and try to win a football game.
Paula graduated in 1968 as valedictorian of her class. By the way, some 40 years earlier, Paula's mother graduated as valedictorian of the 1927 Buda High School graduating class. 1968 was a bittersweet year. Paula was a member of the very last class of Buda High School. That's because on May 6, 1967, the Buda, Kyle, and Wimberley districts were consolidated into the Hayes Consolidated Independent School District.
The spring of 1968, when we graduated, that was the end of Buda High School per se. And the new school began in 1968, the fall of '68. That became Hayes, everything was Hayes High School.
The school was used as the junior high after the consolidation, and the high school students attended classes in Kyle. Today, things have come full circle with another change on the horizon. A new Buda Elementary campus is being constructed and will open in 2019. The big question, what happens to this school? Hayes CISD officials say they plan to keep the historic portion of the campus intact, and they will seek the public's help for ideas on how to use the school. Both Paula and Larry would love to see the school's history on display.
You know, I think some type of a museum, some type of a historical monument to the people that made this place a fine place.
Museum or something very nice here, because there are a lot of memories that need to be preserved. This is a very, very special place, and to us it's almost a sacred place.